Growing up, I was always told about this idea of fana fillah, or being one with Allah. I'd say to myself, God, you are my Everest, and I will climb that mountain of life without ever resting just to reach you. See, God was the mountain peak, something I had to spend my life trying to get to. God was one and I was two, creating this kind of duality, not really understanding the true reality. See, La ilaha illallah means there is no God but God. Take that in though. La ilaha illallah. There is no God but God. One more time. La ilaha illallah. There is no God but God. There is no being but God, no existence but the existence of God. See, God wasn't just a mountain peak but my ice pick. God's the shoes I would use to try and get to the top. God's the rope I'd hold on to just in case I drop. God is the entire mountain and not just the highest spot. Shoot, God's everything the universe holds, the whole lot. And this idea of fana fillah is not about two entities becoming one, but understanding that there are none but Allah. Ibn Arabi said, the true goal is this realization, that there is no existence but that of God alone. And all them philosophers and mystics and poets have known it's a constant exploration to try and understand God and His creation. But the great ones have always spoken about the true search coming from within. But will looking at the man in the mirror give me a clear picture of what I'm searching for? All this time I've been looking out at the night sky through a telescope. Should I have been looking inside through a microscope? And how can I see God through my eyes and my lens? Don't I need God's glasses just to see Him? If there's no existence but God, no duality, then is God me? Will this inner contemplation, trying to understand every revelation, be the way in which I take in this true reality? I don't know. All I do know is, Allah, you are hidden gems concealed within a treasure chest. And every disclosure gets me closer to understanding my Everest. Thank you.
उस पे ही राज़ी रहूं जो किया तूने मुझको अता। ये जो नादामत की माला है मेरे गले में पड़ी, तस्बीह इसको बना दे लाही, तस्बीह इसको बना दे लाई। अल्लाहुम्मा इन्नी अस्सलुका बिरहमतिका या ज़ुल जलाल, अपने किए पे झुकाए हूँ सर में रंजो मला। तू जो सुने ना सुनाऊंगा किसको ये फरियाद में, तू ही समीउल बसीरुल मुजीब, तू ही समीउल बसीरुल मुजीब, तू ही समीउल बसीरुल मुजीब। रब्बे जाने बिलाली भी तू और हम भी तू
My faith is my anchor. Like words to a poet or moves to a dancer, my faith is my anchor. When the world's expectations are too high, I know I can sit down and look up to the sky, and he'll be there, ready to reply. He is the first and the last, the sun and the moon, the effervescent light that shines bright in the gloom. I know he'll be there, whether I am wrong or right, and he will be the one to hold my hand through life. Because if not for him, I would live in fear every day. L-I-F-E, live in fear every day. That's what my life would stand for, and the wind would wisp me away. I am a flower that grows with his words, devoted to devotion, and I will never turn. He is the sand in the hourglass of hope, and when I think I've fallen, he hands me a rope. So I ask, what is faith? The answer I seek to find, but then I look into his eyes and know that's where the answer lies. For 17 years he's been by my side in my moments of despair to my feelings of pride. So I look up to him, but I know he is right by my side. I am the student, he is the teacher. I am the listener, he is the preacher. I am the butterfly, he is the cocoon. It is him who sets me free to grow, he gives me room. See, this world is a sinful abyss. Materialism tramples realism, and faith is slowly missed. But we must hang on in these tough times because everything is written. He is the author of our lives. So I am unaware of what my next chapter states, but I know through his words he will show me the way. His hand is on my shoulder to guide me back to the right path when I fall astray. I am blind, but he helps me to see. And in the words of the great Rumi, only from the heart can you touch the sky. So my heart reaches out to you, O divine. Your mind is deep like the ocean. You make sure that I am never blue. And in the time of your diamond jubilee, you are the brightest shining diamond. And I sincerely love you.
Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam has said, "Truly Ali is from me, and I am from him, and he is the wali of every believer after me."
Bismillah.
तुझसे मेरी क़ुव्वत है मौला तू रूह की इबादत है
तू हर शय में तू ही बसा शेरे अज़दा
तुझसे है नूरे ज़बान प्यारे मौला
खुदा मांगू तुझसे दुआ दीदार दे मौला है इल्तिजा तू हर शय में
तू ही बसा
शेरे अज़दा तुझसे ही है ये नूरे ज़मान प्यारे मौला जान तू है,
साया भी है तुझसे जुड़ा, कतराए नूर हूँ मैं,
तुझ में मिलना मकसद मेरा।
तू हर शय में तू ही बसा, शेरे यज़दा तुझसे ही है नूरे ज़मा, प्यारे मौला।
या अली 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 या खुदा मांगू तुझसे दुआ,
दीदार दे मौला है इल्तिजा, नूरे खुदा मांगू तुझसे दुआ, दीदार दे मौला है इल्तिजा। या अली अली अली
Through his words, through his actions, and through the results obtained by the institutions that he has founded and encouraged and nourished, he has become a light in much of the world's conflicting darkness.
The Aga Khan, he's one of the most fascinating people who I've ever met. He's like a head of state without a country. He's a religious leader. He's also doing some of the most important charitable work in the Islamic world.
I am fascinated and sometimes frustrated when representatives of the Western world, especially the Western media, try to describe the work of our Aga Khan Development Network in fields like education, health, the economy, media, and the building of social infrastructure, reflecting a certain historical tendency of the West to separate the secular from the religious. They often describe it either as philanthropy or entrepreneurship. What is not understood is that this work is for us a part of our institutional responsibility. It flows from the mandate of the office of the Imam to improve the quality of worldly life for the concerned communities.
Your Highness, if a complete stranger who had no idea who you were or what you were came up to you and said, "What do you do for a living?" what would be your reply?
I would say that my role is I'm the hereditary Imam of a Shia Muslim community, an international Shia Muslim community.
My family and myself trace our family line back to the Prophet and are accepted therefore by the community as the Imams.
And an Imam in Islam is responsible for the security of the people who refer to him. He's responsible for the interpretation of faith, and he's responsible for their quality of life. To understand this dimension of the religious office I hold, one must appreciate that Islam encompasses both the spiritual and the secular. The two are so deeply intertwined that one cannot imagine this separation or their separation. This unity underpins an unrelenting effort towards an equitable order where the vulnerable are helped to regain the dignity of self-fulfillment. As you build your lives for yourselves and others, you will come to rest upon certain principles. Central to my life has been a verse in the Holy Quran which addresses itself to the whole of humanity. It says, "O mankind, fear your Lord, who created you of a single soul, and from it created its mate, and from the pair of them scattered abroad many men and women." This remarkable verse speaks both of the inherent diversity of mankind and of the unity of mankind, the single soul created by a single creator, the spiritual legacy which distinguishes the human race from all other forms of life. I know of no more beautiful expression about the unity of our human race, born indeed from a single soul. Thank you.
یا علی مدد، خوش آمدید، بیانوینو و سال نو مبارک. تشکر از شما برای تنظیم یکی دیگر از برنامه‌های با آفتاب جمعه شب. اسم من دیبرا سومانی هست و افتخار این را دارم که همه اعضای جماعت و همچنان اعضای خانواده آنها را از سایر ادیان و مذاهب از سراسر جهان در این برنامه خوش آمدید بگویم. من از ادمنتون با شما مخاطب هستم و من بسیار هیجان زده هستم که امشب این برنامه را میزبانی می کنم. در حالی که ما چند هفته اول سال 2021 را آغاز کردیم، امیدوارم که هفته خوب را سپری کرده باشید و فرصت برای استراحت در طول سال نو را داشته باشید. ما خیلی غذاهای متنوع پختیم و مقدار زیاد آن غذاها را در خانه خود خوردیم و همچنان توانستیم از خانه بیرون شویم و اسکیت سواری کنیم، هاکی بازی کردیم و با 2 سگمان به پیاده روی رفتیم تا تعادل زیاد برقرار کنیم. امیدوارم که از نمایش برخی از هنرمندان با استعداد که در جشنواره‌های هنرهای جوبلی اشتراک کرده اند لذت ببرید. و اکنون نگاهی به برنامه امشب می اندازیم. من افتخار این را دارم که از جناب الوایس صاحب حسین چارانیا خوش آمدید بگویم. بسیاری از شما حسین را از وبینار خود به خاطر سفیر اسلام به یاد خواهید آورد. برنامه امروز در مورد همین موضوع ادامه دارد. بسیاری از ما در مورد ایمان سوال می کنیم و ممکن است برای یافتن جواب درست تلاش کنیم. من به عنوان فردی که مذهب اسماعیلی را پذیرفته است، بسیاری از این سوالات را برای خانواده و دوستان خود مطرح کردم و از تجربه خود می دانم که پاسخ دادن به این سوالات دشوار است. من در برنامه سفرهای جماعتی حضور داشتم و در طول 20 سال گذشته فرصتهای زیاد داشتم تا بتوانم رشد کنم و بهتر بتوانم ایمان و انتخاب خود را برای استوار ماندن در مذهب اسماعیلی بیان کنم. امشب الوایس حسین ما را به برخی از این سوالات باز می‌گرداند و به همه ما کمک می‌کند تا پاسخ این سوالات را بیان کنیم. الوایس صاحب چارانیا با نهادهای مختلف جماعتی شبکه انکشافی آقا خان در داخل کانادا و خارج از کشور در کشورهای چون افغانستان، تاجیکستان و هند خدمات رضاکارانه انجام دادند. ایشان در حال حاضر عضو کمیته طریقه و تعلیمات مذهبی شیعه امام اسماعیلی در کانسل کانادا می باشند و همچنان برنامه سفیران کانادا برای جماعت را رهبری می کنند. الوایس صاحب حسین به طور حرفه‌ای از دانشگاه واترلو در رشته کامپیوتر ساینس فارغ التحصیل شدند و در حال حاضر مصروف کار در کمپانی فناوری بشورنس که انشورتک ستارتاپ کمپانی در کلگری می باشد را رهبری می کند. در حال حاضر زمینه‌های کسب و کار و کارآفرینی را بررسی می کنند و اکنون به الوای صاحب حسین خوش آمدید می گوییم و از ایشان بسیار سپاس گذاریم که برای این برنامه وقت گذاشتند.
Hussein, thanks so much for joining us today. It's a privilege to have you with us. With the increased visibility of the community, we often received questions about who the Ismailis are, who is the Aga Khan, what is the Aga Khan Development Network, and other such inquiries. So it's great to have you here to help us and think through and articulate responses to some of these questions to help others have a better understanding and that we can all become better ambassadors for our community and our faith. Today we're going to go through questions that have frequently been posed to us and have you help us with the responses. Does that sound all right?
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you for having me. And I'll try my best to share thoughts on some of these questions and also to draw on clips from videos or speeches from Maulana Hazir Imam that touch on some of these questions. And one thing that I might say just at the very beginning is for all of us to just keep in mind that generally there isn't a one-size-fits-all answer for questions because questions really depend on the context of how, when, and where they're being asked. But with that in mind, as mentioned, we'll try our best and hopefully what everyone hears will be helpful today.
That sounds wonderful. Thank you so much. Our first question is a common one. I know a bit about the Ismailis as I have friends who are Ismaili, but I'm not quite sure what this means. Can you help me understand who the Ismailis are and whether they are different from other Muslims?
Great question and a common one for sure. So let's start with actually a clip from Hazir Imam, and this was a speech that he gave to the parliament here in Canada.
The Ismaili Imamate is a supranational entity representing the succession of Imams since the time of the Prophet. But let me clarify something more about the history of that role in both the Sunni and the Shia interpretations of the Muslim faith. The Sunni position is that the Prophet nominated no successor, and that spiritual moral authority belongs to those who are learned in matters of religious law. As a result, there are many Sunni Imams in a given time and in a given place. But others believed that the Prophet had designated his cousin and son-in-law, Ali, as his successor. From that early division, a host of further distinctions grew up. But the question of rightful leadership remains central. In time, the Shia were also subdivided over these questions, so that today the Ismailis are the only Shia community who throughout history have been led by a living hereditary Imam in direct descent from the Prophet. The role of the Ismaili Imam is a spiritual one. His authority is that of religious interpretation. It is not a political role. I do not govern any land. At the same time, Islam believes fundamentally that the spiritual and material worlds are inextricably connected. Faith does not remove Muslims or their Imams from daily practical matters in family life, in business, in community affairs.
So you see that Maulana Hazir Imam clearly talked about and articulated the difference between the Shia interpretation and the Sunni interpretation of Islam. All Muslims believe in one God, Allah, which means God in Arabic, and believe in Prophet Muhammad, may peace be upon him, and his progeny. The Shia believe that before the Prophet passed away, he designated a successor to lead the Ummah after him, and that successor was Hazrat Ali, may peace be upon him. And there's actually quite a bit that could be said about this relationship between Hazrat Ali and the Prophet. Hazrat Ali was the Prophet's first cousin. He grew up in the home of the Prophet, and as we know, Hazrat Ali was given the honor of marrying the beloved daughter of the Prophet, Bibi Fatima, may peace be upon her.
Thanks, Hussein. Yes, it's really important for us to be able to understand that differentiation and that we are Shia Ismaili Muslims.
Yeah, exactly. Ismailis are Shia, and there's, as mentioned by Hazrat Imam, there's many communities within the larger Shia community. And so the largest in terms of numbers are the Twelvers. And that's a Shia community that after Hazrat Ali believed that there were 11 more Imams. And the belief is that their 12th Imam is currently hidden from the physical world. Another Shia community are the Mustali Ismailis. And one of the sub-communities, which is perhaps commonly known, are the Bohras. And the Bohras are also a community that believe that their Imam is currently hidden, but is guiding their dais, and their dais are leading the community. And of course, there is the Nizari Ismaili community, commonly known as the Ismailis. And as Maulana Hazrat Imam indicated, the Ismailis are the only Shia community that has always been led by a Hazrat Imam, or a physically present Imam that descends from the Prophet through Bibi Fatima and Hazrat Ali.
And we are so lucky and so blessed for that. Thank you so much for sharing. And this gives rise to our second question. Since Ismailis and other Shias believe that the Imams are successors to the Prophet Muhammad, does that mean your Imam is like a prophet to you?
Actually, it's really important to differentiate between the two, between prophets and Imams. So all Muslims believe in the many prophets that came before Prophet Muhammad, such as Abraham or Ibrahim, Moses or Musa, Jesus or Isa, may peace be upon all of them. And the belief is that Prophet Muhammad, may peace be upon him, and his progeny was the final and last prophet, and therefore the last to receive revelation. The Shia belief in Imamat is that it is the Imam who has the rightful authority and knowledge to interpret that revelation and to apply that interpretation for the current day and time.
Thanks, Hussein, for making that distinction very clear. In a similar vein, a common question arises about Maulana Hazrat Imam's role, and it leads us to a related question. I've heard about the Aga Khan and some of the work that he does, but I don't know much about him. Is he like a pope?
Yeah, a very common comparison that is made. But once again, it is important to differentiate between the two roles because they are quite different. And Maulana Hazrat Imam has been asked that question many times in interviews and has spoken about these differences. One of the main differences is the fact that the imamate is a hereditary office, whereas the pope is elected by cardinals. Also, in Islam, we don't differentiate between temporal or worldly matters and spiritual or religious matters. In Islam, the two, deen and dunya, are considered to be intertwined, inseparable. And so the Imam not only guides his community, his followers, on religious matters, but also provides guidance on matters of this world, and also works towards the improvement of the quality of life of his community and those who live amongst them, works towards the security of those communities. And similarly, in regards to his own life, the Imam is not expected to retreat or withdraw from worldly matters. And in fact, it's quite the contrary.
Great. Thanks a lot for creating that differentiation for us. It's really important to understand that. And, it is something that may be hard to articulate sometimes when we get asked that question. So thank you. It's very useful for us to be able to now have a better way to differentiate and to articulate that. Our next question again touches on the role of the Imam. Why is the Aga Khan, as a spiritual leader, involved in business affairs?
Yeah, so similar to the previous point and the previous question, is that sometimes we take notions of what a spiritual leader ought to look like, and we try to apply that to Islam, whereas in the notion of spiritual leadership in Islam is quite different. And so once again, let's hear some words from Maulana Hazir Imam on this matter.
The authority of the Ismaili Imam is spiritual rather than temporal in nature. At the same time, Islam believes fundamentally that the spiritual and material worlds are inextricably connected. This means that the Imam of the time also has a responsibility for improving the quality of life, the quality of worldly life, for his people and for the peoples among whom the Ismailis live. It is to advance those responsibilities that so much of my attention over these 60 years has been committed not only to strengthening the Imamat's capacities to fulfill its mandate, but also to the work of what we now call the AKDN, the Aga Khan Development Network.
So hopefully this belief in the intertwining of the temporal and spiritual realms is starting to make more sense. It does cause some confusion when looking at it from a perspective or from a background outside of Islam. And I think once people do understand this a little better, it becomes more obvious as to what the role of the Imam really is. And many questions become more simpler to understand. So again, going to this aspect of business, the Prophet himself was engaged in many aspects of life, including business. And so what is important is the way that money is earned, the way that these businesses are carried out. And by that, I mean in ethical means. What's also important is how that money is used. And so the Imam guides us not only to strive for spiritual success, but at the same time to not detach ourselves from responsibilities of this material world. And he guides us to strive for success in this material world, but not for the objective of wealth and power, but rather to use those resources to help others. And I think the last point that is important to touch on is the fact that many times we confuse businesses of the AKDN, and by that I mean companies under the Aga Khan Fund for Economic Development. Many times we are confused about the objectives of these companies. Yes, they are for profit, but those profits are reinvested in the countries which they reside. And if you look at the industries that many of these companies are in, they are strategically chosen to help the development of those countries. So whether that means that there's investments made in communications, in the financial sector, in tourism, or in media, these are all, again, specifically to help promote and stabilize the economic development of such countries.
Well, thanks for framing that, because I think that sometimes people do feel conflicted internally about their success. And, I think sort of the takeaway from this is that, if we are all successful, we can help others, and everyone can, have the quality of life that Islam really teaches us about. So, and to take care of others. So I think that's really helpful to frame it in that way. But let's return to Ismailis and Imam for a moment. We have a question that may also be rooted in a lack of correct understanding. And the question is this: I understand the Ismailis had an empire in certain periods of history, and this gave rise to the term assassins. Is that true?
Yeah, so maybe we'll start with the first point. The Ismailis have led a couple empires or states, and so the first being the Fatimid Empire. Fatimid Empire is known for a few things. It's known for the great contributions that were made during that time to the knowledge society of that time through academic institutions that were founded by the Fatimids, such as Dar al-Ilm, such as Al-Azhar. The Fatimid Empire is also known for its pluralistic and meritocratic governance. It's also known for founding and building the city Al-Qahira, which today is known as Cairo. And after this period in our history, the next period is commonly referred to as the Alamut period. And it is during this time frame that there are some legends and some myths that have been mixed up with facts and with reality. And some of this is due to travelers, such as Marco Polo, that came, or that some say perhaps came to this area during that time period. But recent academic research has shown that this actual term assassins being used to refer to the Ismailis, the source of that were actually from communities or empires or individuals that were hostile to the Ismailis at that time. And so it's really important to understand the context of that time period. The Ismaili state was comprised of various fortresses around what present day we call Iran and Syria. But outside those fortresses were different empires, different communities, and some of them were hostile to the Ismailis. And so there were conflicts that did take place. Again, it was a complex time of various empires. It was a time of the Crusades, and the Ismaili castles were many times threatened, sometimes actually attacked. And so there were incidents of self-defense, and that's something that should be remembered, and it's something that is many times overlooked. And if you step back and if you look at the Alamut period in context of our whole history, you will see that our Imams have always promoted and have always tried to choose peace. If you look at the work of Maulana Hazar Imam, if you look at some of the decisions that were made during the time of Maulana Sultan Muhammad Shah, for example, while he was the lead of the League of Nations, even if you go back in time even further to the early days of Islam, where the Muslims were defending themselves quite often. So again, that's point number one, is the point about self-defense and about first choosing peace. Point number two, which I think is very important, is that unfortunately, when the Alamut period is talked about or written about, they don't often mention the fact that these fortresses were homes to some of the great libraries of those times, home to observatories that would welcome scholars from different faiths and backgrounds. So yeah, hopefully those 2 points help provide a bit more light around the Alamut period and this term assassins.
Well, it sure does, because you've painted a really brilliant picture for us to be able to understand the context of the time and the complexities that Ismailis were facing, and how information is shared and documented over time. It can be misinterpreted for sure, and that amongst all of that misunderstanding, there's lots of evidence showing that the Ismailis have been part of creating information and sharing knowledge and building capacity globally, and lots of lessons for us to take away from that. So thank you so much. it does kind of lead into some of the misconceptions that we have in present day when we start to think about like 9/11, for example, and how that may have contributed to some of the misperceptions around Islam and the association in some people's minds between the two, which leads us to our next question. Why do we hear so often about Islamic militants? Does the Quran incite people to violence?
Yeah, so unfortunately, as you know, this is also a common question. I think it speaks to world events over the last couple decades, but also speaks to a general misunderstanding of Islam itself as a faith. And so let's hear some words from Maulana Hazir Imam on the matter.
Well, there is, without any doubt, a growing sense amongst Muslim communities around the world that there are forces at play that it doesn't control, but which does view the Muslim world with, let's say, unhappiness or more. I would simply say, however, that if you analyze the situation, I don't think you can conclude that all Muslims from all backgrounds are part of that phenomenon. Secondly, if you go back and look at that, you will find that a lot of the causes of those communities are people where there's a long-standing, unresolved political crisis. It's very, very risky, I think, to interpret these situations as being specific to the faith of Islam. It is specific to peoples, sometimes ethnic groups, but it's not specific to the faith of Islam. With all due respect, if you look at the crisis in the Middle East, that crisis was born at the end of the First World War. The crisis in Kashmir was born through the freedom of the Indian continent. These are political issues originally. They're not religious issues. You can't attribute the faith of Islam to them. I think the second point I would make is this tendency to generalize Islam. There are many different interpretations of Islam. As a Muslim, if I said to you that I didn't recognize the difference between a Greek Orthodox or a Russian Orthodox or a Protestant or a Catholic, I think you'd say to me, but you don't understand the Christian world. Well, let me reverse that question.
So you see, peace is a central value in Islam. Peace was central to the message that Prophet Muhammad, may peace be upon him, and his progeny was delivering. Today, there's over 1.7 billion Muslims in the world that are living in a variety of contexts. And as Hazir Imam mentioned, living in a variety of political situations. Some of these political situations involve land disputes. Some of these situations and contexts involve various historical, cultural traditions. Within this 1.7 billion Muslims, there's a wide range of economic situations, quality of life, a wide range of various issues, as you can imagine, for such a large group of people. And some of these other factors that are involved in these various contexts actually overpower the teachings of the faith itself. And sometimes there are acts that are carried out which are a result of these other factors, such as the political situation or such as the land situation. And then the faith itself is simply used to justify those acts when in fact they have nothing to do with Islam itself.
Yes, and it's really unfortunate that happens, that those lines tend to get blurred in people's minds. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It really has nothing to do with faith and more about other factors for sure. And this is a really difficult one for people to be able to articulate. So I think this provides us something that we can sink our teeth in and be able to help to express ourselves and our faith And thank you for that. This does lead us to a question we seem to get quite often as well. I understand that the Aga Khan Development Network is designed to improve quality of life. Is that for Ismailis only?
Good question. For this, once again, let's hear what Maulana Haziram has to say about the AKDN.
The AKDN, as we call it, is composed of a variety of private, non-governmental, non-denominational agencies, implementing many of the Imamat's responsibilities. We are active in the fields of economic development, job creation, education, healthcare, as well as important cultural initiatives. Most of our AKDN activities have been born from the grassroots of developing countries, reflecting their aspirations and their fragilities. Through the years, of course, this landscape has changed fundamentally, with the creation of new states like Bangladesh, the horrors of ethnic cleansing in Uganda, the collapse of the Soviet Empire, and the emergence of new countries with large Ismaili populations, such as Tajikistan. More recently, of course, we have faced the conflicts in Afghanistan and in Syria. But through all of these experiences, the Ismaili peoples have demonstrated an impressive capacity to persevere and to progress. Our work has always been people-driven. It grows out of the age-old Islamic ethic, committed to goals with universal relevance: the elimination of poverty, access to education, and social peace in a pluralist environment. The AKDN's fundamental objective is to improve the quality of human life.
So, although the AKDN is inspired by the ethics of Islam, and although it is a vehicle for which the Imam carries out his mandate to improve the quality of life of the community and those who live around them, AKDN itself is not a religious institution, and by no means is the work of the AKDN only for Ismailis. In fact, every country that the AKDN works in, Ismailis are a minority, and in fact, there are some countries where the AKDN is present where there are little or no Ismailis.
That's amazing. The work that the Aga Khan Development Network does touches many, many people across the globe, and there's a lot of beneficiaries. And I think that we're so fortunate to be able to have that and to be able to be involved in that and to help and serve others. Here's another interesting question, Hussein. What is the difference between a mosque and a Jamaat Khana?
Yeah, so Maulana Haziram has actually spoken about the difference between these two places of prayer a few times, and especially when speaking at a foundation stone laying of a Jamaat Khana or openings of Ismaili centers. So let's take a look at one of those clips right now.
At this juncture, perhaps it would be appropriate to situate one of the functions of the Ismaili Center in the tradition of Muslim piety. For many centuries, a prominent feature of the Muslim religious landscape has been the variety of spaces of gathering coexisting harmoniously with the masjid, which in itself has accommodated a range of diverse institutional spaces for educational, social, and reflective purposes. Historically serving communities of different interpretations and spiritual affiliations, these spaces have retained their cultural nomenclatures and characteristics, from ribat and zawiya to khanaqah and Jamaat Khana. The congregational space incorporated within the Ismaili Center belongs to the historic category of Jamaat Khana, an institutional category that also serves a number of sister Sunni and Shia communities in their respective contexts in many parts of the world. Here, it will be a space reserved for traditions and practices specific to the Shia Ismaili Tariqa of Islam.
So the two places of worship actually coexist. One of them, the masjid or the mosque, is for Muslims of various interpretations, and in parallel to the existence of the masjid are a variety of other sacred places, places of worship for various communities within Islam. And many times these other places of worship are actually reserved for the traditions and practices of the respective communities. The word tariqa refers to practices of some of these communities within Islam. So, for example, Sufi tariqas. There are many Sufi tariqas, many Sufi communities and their specific practices. And for the Ismaili tariqa and for the Ismaili Jamaat Khana, it's for those who have given bayat or allegiance to the Ismaili Imam. And so this touches on another question that comes up quite often, and the question is, why are Ismailis only allowed in Jamaat Khanas during times of prayer? And again, going back to the fact that it's not something that is unique to the Ismaili tariqa. There are other places of worship that are specifically for practices of those tariqas. But another way of looking at it, which I find really helpful, is a metaphor that I've heard be used, and it's a metaphor that compares a place of worship to a family home. My home, your home, homes of families around the world. And if you look at the family home, we have guests that come in, perhaps not during COVID, but at other times, guests and loved ones who come in, who we spend time with in various places within the home. But when there are times where we want to have a family discussion, so for example, if there's something that my parents want to speak to me about, maybe my father wants to give me advice on something, or my mother wants to encourage me about something. Generally, those conversations happen when there's just family that's there. And that's okay. That notion of wanting privacy for such matters is okay. Not only in the family unit, but also in the community unit.
Wow, I really love that metaphor of family. It's really helpful, and it really does feel, it feels really comfortable, and that privacy, is something that we respect, and family is something that we cherish, and the place of worship is something that we cherish, and we respect privacy there as well. So I think that is a really great metaphor. Thank you.
Glad. And maybe I'll just add that, if we look at the various questions that were asked today, it's obvious that we many times try to better understand and articulate our identity or the role of the Imam by comparing it to other communities, or by comparing it to other figures of authority or positions of authority. But again, sometimes it's okay that it's not necessarily comparable. And sometimes we don't have to look so far to be able to better understand our beliefs or our identity. Sometimes it can be closer to home. Another example that I like to use is sometimes we're asked about why we keep a picture of the Imam close to us, whether it's on our desk at work or on a wall at home. And again, here, I think that we can use the metaphor of family. For it's similar to the reasons as to why we keep pictures of our family members close to us. It's because that picture represents a notion of identity for us. The picture represents love, and looking at it reminds us of something or someone that is dear to us.
Again, painting a wonderful picture for us, and I think that it warms all of our hearts. It certainly warms my heart, so thank you for that. And I also want to thank you so much for taking the time today to answer these commonly asked questions. You've done a brilliant job, and it really helped me to understand, and I'm sure others who are watching, to really understand how we can better articulate who we are as Ismailis, and to be a better ambassador of our faith as well. And, you know, to gently but respectfully correct misperceptions or misunderstandings that others may have of us or our faith. And of course, there's so much, to it than this, but, it's a wonderful start, and there's so many resources available for us to continue our learning journey. And so thank you so much. And I look forward to, seeing you again soon.
Yes, you too. Thank you. It was my pleasure.
جهان سپاس از الوای صاحب حسین برای این وعظ عالمانه‌شان که برای ما کمک میکنند تا سفیران بهتر برای مذهب خود باشیم. قبل از رفتن به بخش بعدی که بخش موسیقی دلخواه ما است، چند اطلاعیه را به سهم شما میرسانم. و همچنان اطمینان حاصل کنید که برنامه‌های بازتاب جمعه شب آینده با ما بپیوندید تا برای اولین بار در یک برنامه کوتاه تحت عنوان مهارت‌های ضروری برای موفق شدن در دنیای امروز توسط رئیس صاحب امیرعلی قاسم لقا در نظر گرفته شده است. حتما آن را تماشا کنید. و در مورد کمپ حدیثه آگاهی داشته باشید که یک برنامه مجازی هیجان انگیز برای جوانان اسماعیلی 14 الی 17 سال از سراسر کانادا می باشد. کمپ حدیثه یک برنامه مجازی است که در 2 آخر هفته متوالی در ماه مارچ برگزار خواهد شد. قابل یادآوری است که ثبت نام در این برنامه در حال حاضر برای شرکت کنندگان و مشاوران پذیرفته می شود. برای جزئیات بیشتر به iicanada.org مراجعه کنید. ما امشب برنامه خود را مثل همیشه با نمایش موسیقی به اتمام می رسانیم. قطعه اول موسیقی به نام زیور اثری از منلی جمال است که در سپتامبر 2020 در میوزیم آقا خان در سالن لاجورد اجرا شده بود. خواهید دید که چگونه اجرای گیتار سولو یا یک نفره او مخاطبان و شنونده های او را از مرزهای فرهنگی مختلف محو خود کرده و تأثیرات غربی و شرقی را برای زنده کردن موسیقی زیبای خود به ارمغان آورده است. قطعه دوم به عنوان نور توسط گروه کانکورد اجرا گردیده است که ترکیب اصلی آن توسط یک گروه 3 نفره از ایالات متحده آمریکا است. متن ترانه حاوی مضامین نور الهی است و متن آن ترجمه انگلیسی آیت نور از قرآن شریف است. خوشحالم که میزبان شما در این برنامه بودم و افتخار میکنم که از من خواسته شده بود که میزبان این برنامه باشم. این راهی است که همه ما با هم در هر جمعه احساس میکنیم که در ارتباط هستیم و همچنان در سال 2021 بهترین ها را برایتان آرزو میکنم. تشکر. یا علی مدد.
Alhamdulillah, 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 Alhamdulillah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen.
I close my eyes and call on your name. You grant me grace, not mine to claim. I contemplate the source of my being. The drop and the ocean are one and the same. As I rise, blessed to be alive, alive, I feel so mesmerized. Your light in the darkness reveals your truth. Your love in the shadows brings me to you. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah, His light is as a niche in which is a lamp, and the lamp is in a glass. The glass is as though it were a shining star. It is lit from a blessed tree. An olive neither of the east nor of the west, the oil of which would well nigh give light, though no fire touched it. Light upon light, Allah guides to His light whom He will. Nurun Allah Nur, light upon light.
Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah.